Manchester City are entering a new era under Enzo Maresca. But with Haaland, Rodri, Foden, and some exciting new faces, how strong is this 2026-27 squad? Let's take a look. Head coach, Enzo Maresca. The Italian coach leads Manchester City into a new era. He inherits a squad packed with talent, but his biggest challenge will be turning that quality into trophies. Goalkeepers, Gianluigi Donnarumma. He's a 27-year-old Italian goalkeeper, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 45 million euros. At his best, he's an elite shot stopper with the experience to perform on the biggest stage. Geronimo Rulli. He's a 34-year-old Argentine goalkeeper, contracted until 2028. An experienced international and European goalkeeper, Rulli gives City a reliable option between the posts. Marcus Bettinelli. He's a 34-year-old English goalkeeper, contracted until 2027 with a market value of around 300,000 euros. Experienced and dependable, he provides valuable depth in goal. Defenders. Ruben Diaz. He's a 29-year-old Portuguese defender, contracted until 2029 with a market value of around 55 million euros. Marc Guéhi. He's a 26-year-old English defender, contracted until 2031 with a market value of around 70 million euros. Joško Gvardiol. He's a 24-year-old Croatian defender, contracted until 2028 with a market value of around 70 million euros. Abdulkadir Kusanov. He's a 22-year-old Uzbek defender, contracted until 2029 with a market value of around 50 million euros. Nathan Ake. He's a 31-year-old Dutch defender, contracted until 2027 with a market value of around 12 million euros. Max Allain. He's a 20-year-old English center back, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 8 million euros. Still developing, he's a promising young defender with plenty of potential. Vitor Reis. He's a 20-year-old Brazilian defender, contracted until 2029 with a market value of around 25 million euros. Ryan Ait-Nouri. He's a 25-year-old Algerian left-back, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 40 million euros. Nico O'Reilly. He's a 21-year-old English player, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 70 million euros. His versatility and attacking ability make him another exciting young option. Rico Lewis. He's a 21-year-old English defender, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 28 million euros. Intelligent, technically gifted, and versatile, he's one of City's most exciting academy graduates. Mateus Nunes. He's a 27-year-old Portuguese international, contracted until 2028 with a market value of around 50 million euros. His ability to play midfield or right back gives City valuable tactical flexibility. Midfielders. Tijani Reinders. He's a 27-year-old Dutch midfielder, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 50 million euros. Energetic, technical, and progressive, he's one of the new midfielders expected to make a big impact. Mateo Kovacic. He's a 32-year-old Croatian midfielder, contracted until 2027 with a market value of around 10 million euros. His close control, experience, and ball-carrying ability make him valuable in midfield. Elliot Anderson. He's a 23-year-old English midfielder, contracted until 2031 with a market value of around 70 million euros. Strong, energetic, and full of potential, Anderson could become an important part of City's midfield. Nico Gonzalez. He's a 24-year-old Spanish midfielder, contracted until 2029 with a market value of around 40 million euros. Comfortable in possession and technically gifted, he gives City another option for controlling midfield. Rodri. He's a 30-year-old Spanish midfielder, contracted until 2027 with a market value of around 50 million euros. He controls the tempo, wins the ball, and dictates games. Rodri remains the heartbeat of this City midfield. Ryan Cherki. He's a 23-year-old French attacking midfielder, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 90 million euros. Phil Foden. He's a 26-year-old English midfielder, contracted until 2030 with a market value of around 70 million euros. Calvin Phillips. He's a 30-year-old English midfielder, contracted until 2028 with a market value of around 2.5 million euros. Attackers. Erling Haaland. He's a 26-year-old Norwegian striker, contracted until 2034 with a market value of around 200 million euros. Powerful, incredibly fast, and ruthless in front of goal, Haaland remains City's biggest weapon in attack. Omar Marmoush. He's a 27-year-old Egyptian forward, contracted until 2029, with a market value of around 55 million euros. Jeremy Doku. He's a 24-year-old Belgian winger, contracted until 2031, with a market value of around 75 million euros. Savinho. He's a 22-year-old Brazilian winger, contracted until 2031, with a market value of around 35 million euros. Antoine Semenyo. He's a 26-year-old Ghanaian forward, contracted until 2031, with a market value of around 80 million euros. Jeremy Monga. He's a 17-year-old English winger, contracted until 2031, with a market value of around 15 million euros. And that's Manchester City's complete 2026-27 squad. A new era, new faces, but the same ambition, to win everything. For more football stories, squad breakdowns, and the players behind the game, subscribe to Beyond the Game. Football isn't just about the score, it's about the story.